Recording live from the Hoban Law Group here in Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Eric Singular. Welcome to the Hoban Minute. I'm sitting here today with my friend, president and founder of the Hoban Law Group, Mr. Bob Hoban, and we are talking about cannabis and our brave new world. And we are joined by the CEO of Green Flower Media, Max Simon. Max, thank you for being here with us this evening.
Oh, good to be with you guys.
And before we get into the meat of this conversation, I wanted to touch on a LinkedIn post that I saw recently from you. I think it's incredibly timely, and it maybe speaks to a theme that we'll kind of hone in on throughout this episode. But you talked about strengthening your mindset. You talked about having personal daily practices and routines and rituals that help you stay centered. And just give us a sense of how you, Max, what do you do? How do you stay centered in a world with so much turbulence and so much going on that we don't have control over? Give us a sense of how you strengthen your mindset, my friend.
So when this whole kind of COVID-19 pandemic hit, one of the things that became really clear to me really quickly was that we were entering a period of complete uncertainty, and that in that period of uncertainty, it was going to last likely longer than people wanted it to. And so in the midst of uncertainty, I'm somebody that believes very strongly in still trying to find ways to bring some certainty into the equation. And for me, that has meant really developing and utilizing an arsenal of practices that I do on a daily basis that are certain, that are predictable, and that I can kind of take control of. So this is something I'm very passionate about and I love talking about because it's brought so much value to my life. But on a daily basis, meaning 7 days a week, I meditate every day. I do some form of fitness every day. I do yoga every day. I do breathing exercises every day. I do cold showers or cold plunges, cold therapy every day. I have my supplements and morning green drinks every day. And I do some belief shaping in my mindset every single day. And it sounds like a lot. It does take, between 75 to 90 minutes of every morning and evening to do all these things. And yet I literally don't think that I would have been capable of being through this period, navigating all the changes to the business, navigating the world without having the certainty of these practices that I could rest into.
No, that's really interesting, Max. And, when you think about how our routines have changed, having that go-to, that foundation of what you do on a regular basis certainly keeps you grounded. But, for the benefit of our listeners, tell us a little bit about your background. What brought you to Green Flower Media in terms of, what it does today and creating and founding that company? Where'd you come from and where are you going?
Yeah, thanks. So Green Flower is a leader in cannabis education and training. And, we started in 2014 with the desire to educate the world about cannabis. And where that came from me is, first and foremost, I've always been in education businesses. I started my career in Deepak Chopra's business, where I was the director of products and brand. And we really helped educate the world about meditation and mind-body medicine and natural supplements. And so I had a great experience of taking, a subject like mind-body medicine, meditation, and herbs and those things that were not actually widely accepted, and turning that into not just a very large business, but more importantly, something that had a big impact in the world. And so that kind of started in my education career, and I continued to build different forms of education businesses, both in the business space and the spirituality space and the wellness space. But I had always actually had pretty severe, and I still to this day have pretty severe ADD, and have always been a cannabis consumer, but a closeted one. And so when I was looking for kind of my next opportunity after I had achieved some success and was just looking for something new to do, I was actually called to do some consulting for one of the first vape pen brands in California. And that was my first time looking at the legal cannabis space in 2014. And in that moment of really looking at what this could be, a bunch of things happened for me. One, I was able to really drop the shame and guilt that I had felt my whole life for being a closeted cannabis consumer, although it had always been something that had been really beneficial to me. Secondly, I really started to realize there was no trusted information out there for cannabis. The only information that was out there was basically, some news or some kind of counterculture information, but nothing that was legitimate, and certainly nothing that was helping people to understand how to navigate these things. And then third, I realized again, for my own personal sake, that this wasn't just something that kind of helped me. This had been my medicine my whole life. And that learning how to really dial this plant into my own benefits, could actually provide really measurable benefits. And so I kind of started Green Flower as a personal mission at first to bring some legitimacy to myself. But as we developed and as we got bigger and as we grew into all these sectors, we realized that we could become an engine to educate the whole world about the different facets of cannabis, from the medical side to the industrial side to the investment side and everything in between. So it's been a very personal journey for me. It's been a lot of zigzagging. I'm not going to lie. Green Flower today is not the Green Flower that we started with, but it certainly has been a worthwhile endeavor and something that's impacted millions of people in a positive way.
Well, let's dive into that zigzag, because I think that's wholly interesting, and it does represent how folks need to survive in this industry, and that is by adapting. When you started this company, and the mission is a broad mission: educate the world about cannabis. That can take many, many, many shapes and sizes. That can go from, pure education. That can go to entertainment. That could be, here's how to cultivate cannabis. Here's how to make your own cannabis oil or butter. Here's how to bake a cannabis brownie. Here's how to invest in cannabis. I mean, the sky is the limit. You know that as well as anybody. So take us on that journey. Where did you start? And what are the factors that make you adapt in real time, sometimes to your own dismay?
Yeah, actually, I've never really told this story in detail, so this will be fun to go through, because it absolutely has been a tremendous zigzag. And when we started, it was very much a consumer-facing media company. The funny thing about Green Flower actually is the mission has never changed, but the strategy and the target audience and kind of how we execute has changed dramatically. So we began as a consumer-facing media company and had an intent that the business model was going to be an advertising-based business model. But we started to get the eyeballs, we started to get the traction. We definitely did not get the advertising revenue or the advertising kind of traction that we were looking for. And so the first kind of pivot was shifting the model from an advertising-based media company to a kind of paid media model where we were charging people for individual courses. And we went through this process for a good year and a half where we were, selling individual courses mostly as medical patients, people that were looking to actually use cannabis medicinally. And as we were doing that, it was getting some traction, but not nearly enough to build a big, multi-million-dollar scalable business. And so then we started to move into more of a subscription model where we would include all of the content under a subscription. And that grew more, but still was very wide and had kind of a lack of real scalable traction. And so even though that was better than the previous model, it was not nearly fast growing enough for what I knew was necessary to build a big business or to attract the right kind of investors. And so then from that point, as we were analyzing all of the data of who was buying this content or subscribing to this content, we started to realize that the predominant group who was really interested in it was the professional. And that's when we kind of had our first, what I would call, more major breakthrough, where we started to tailor Green Flower to provide professional-based training in the form of these certificate programs. And those certificate programs did work, in fact, 3 years into the founding of the business in a way that was actually really scalable. And so we started to build out a new type of team that would produce kind of curriculum-based training that was geared towards professionals. And that started to take us into a place where we realized these curriculums were so robust and so rich that we could actually take them and partner with universities. And so in basically the very end of 2018, we started to take these curriculums to universities, and we started to get some interest that they wanted to partner with us on offering these courses and these programs through the universities. And it took us all the way in literally until the end of 2019, literally December 21st, I believe it was, to finally sign our first school partnership with a school in Florida. And then, interestingly enough, we kind of cruised from there a little bit, and then COVID hit. And once COVID hit, all of those school relationships that we had been nurturing literally all fell into place in a span of a few months. And so since March until now, we've signed an additional 7 university partnerships with schools from UC Riverside to Northern Michigan University to this Florida Atlantic School to University of San Diego, and many more actually, and with about 3 more that'll be closed by the end of this year. And so it took us into this kind of higher education landscape that I had never predicted before that time either. And the only other kind of twist and turn I'll add into the story is that once we finally started to get some of this traction, once we got the school partnerships, we were able to finally raise a relatively decent size round of investment. And part of the thesis there was that we would also move into more enterprise-based training, where we would offer our library and our technology to help train cannabis businesses. And so just this year in 2020 is when we launched that new enterprise business, where we essentially take our whole, multi-thousand-hour training library, and we partner with companies to make sure that their teams are well trained in all the different areas of cannabis. And that's been growing quite nicely. We just signed up Cookies as a client, and Wana Brands as a client, and some other Kiva as a client, some other great companies. And so it's been this zigzag that's taken us to a place after 5.5 years of real adaptability and change and adjusting our strategy to finally get to a place where we've got a nice, good, stable business that's growing in a nice, healthy way and a solidified position in the market.
Well, and this is exactly why I wanted to title this episode Brave New World. And it's not meant in a negative way, in an overly Aldous Huxley way, if you will. It's that certain people like yourself were well positioned for this world that we're now living in, e-learning and plugging into these virtual digital places now where education is happening. And I think it's just so wonderful that you're getting these relationships with universities. And I say that because a couple weeks ago we had a student at a university in Florida who edits this podcast, actually, and he was talking about his experience being in school, being at a university, and approaching his professor, his department head, about wanting to do a cannabis curriculum, and they were like, "No way, kid, that's not going to work." And it's like, okay, I understand the trepidation, but if I'm a student in college right now and I'm looking at industries, particularly in a COVID economy, and I'm looking at industries where there are opportunities, cannabis is where it's at, man. This is where the jobs are, and you're telling me that there's, you can't give me any kind of offering, even if I build it myself. So I think, that you're getting into relationships with these universities who are open-minded. We talked to a professor from Connecticut University, UConn, who was exploring these same kind of things. And it's just, if I was a young guy, not that I'm not a young guy, but if I was a little bit of a younger guy, that's what I would want to be studying if I was in school. So I think it's excellent to hear from you that not only was Green Flower well positioned for, the current situation we're now in, but that it seems like more universities are becoming open to this idea of cannabis, and maybe that's a little bit fostered by the essential business designation. And by all accounts, and Bob, your Forbes article was just about this. This is a market that's showing resilience at a time when the overall U.S. market and the global market is not looking great.
Well, and let's not forget, and I don't want to beat this dead horse, but we've talked about this. The cannabis industry as a commercial enterprise started in one of the deepest recessions we've had in recent times. So it is resilient in that respect, and it continues to grow because there is demand. And with demand and governments and government regulations and increasing commercialism around this, it's naturally going to touch everybody. I used to teach a course to CPAs online, the CPAacademy.com, I believe it was at that point in time, and I taught cannabis courses to them. And one of the questions we did poll questions throughout that, and it was, well, do you ever envision working in the cannabis industry, or what do you think about this? And you'd get these negative comments from some of these more conservative accountants. Oh, I don't want to touch this. I don't want to touch it at all. And my position always was, you better learn about it, because it's going to be on your front step. You're going to have a client. You're going to have a family member. Somebody is going to either need the medicinal benefits of this plant, or they're going to want to participate commercially or in a way that will touch your life. So it is something that begs for education. Now, our good friend Tim Gordon always uses the term semper gumby, meaning rigid but flexible. In this industry, what are those road markers, Max? What is it that caused you to pivot in the direction that you did, which has turned out extraordinarily well, and having that platform, and ultimately it's a testament to your quality of content and the professionals you have on board at Greenflower that put out such well-produced material. That gets you to the table. But how do you make those decisions to go down the road of higher education? Because so many people in this industry have to reinvent themselves. What are the signs? Because some people just stick to the mission, and they try to do far too much.
Well, I guess it's kind of a two-part answer. I think one part is just pure listening to your gut and to your intuition, and not doubting yourself, because one, I always knew a few fundamental truths, even though I didn't know how they would turn out. I knew that cannabis education was going to be necessary because we're building a new industry, and anything new requires education to be successful. I knew that cannabis as an industry also was going to be respected because it's so valuable. I knew that from my own direct experience, that it provides enormous life-changing value. And so I had a fundamental belief in, what the industry and what the plant represented. And then finally, I knew that we were producing really good quality product, no matter what it was we were doing, whether it was our videos or our editorial or our curriculum. I've always had a very high quality bar. So it didn't matter what I did. I just knew that it was going to be great. And so those were all my own kind of intuitive things that just kept me on the path and kept me adjusting, I remember the moment when we were finishing our first curriculum, and it was so robust and so meaty. And we said, this is college ready. And the light bulb, in that moment went off, this is actually college ready. And so I just followed that thread. And so I think that's one part. And then the second part was just, business sense of understanding that, it's not terribly complicated, but it's what you're selling, people have to be buying. And a lot of times as we were building, people were liking what we were doing, but they weren't necessarily spending money on it. And so as a business, I knew that the economics needed to shift, and then I needed to keep hunting until I found the right economic model that actually allowed us to sustain. So I would say one was very rational and logical, just of, being a businessman and understanding the nature of what makes a successful business, with my own natural instinct to, be in this industry, to believe in this industry, to believe in education. And in that, I just kind of zigzagged quite a bit. And I tend to also be a person that listens very deeply, and I appreciate feedback. I appreciate honesty. I appreciate that kind of intellectual debate. And so I'm always asking a lot of questions for input and trying to put it through my filter. And so I would say those were kind of the three factors that helped us navigate to get to this place.
This industry is sprung from dark into the sun, basically, and it's grown quickly, and there's people from all different walks of life that touch it, from Wall Street folks to great operators to folks that have experience with media and lawyers and so forth and so on. And there's an old guard and a new guard. And you talk about this in many of your social media posts. Can you comment on just some of your observations and some of the information that you've gathered as it relates to what is the industry is not always hunky-dory, for lack of a better way to put it. There appears to be a divide between old school and new school, or there's many different ways to skin that cat, so to speak, where there is a divide between the industry in many ways. Can you talk a little bit about that and just some of the feedback you've gotten from your social media posts and how that's influenced the way you do deliver information in this space?
So I have a slightly different way I respond to this conversation than most people would expect, which is that I don't necessarily see this as a cannabis thing. I see this more as a human being thing. And what I mean by that is that, whether it's the cannabis space or there's any other space, there's people out there that are, only focused on money and will do anything it takes to succeed, which means that they have no loyalty, no trust, no respect for whatever it is that they're doing. It's very ego driven. And there's a lot of that in cannabis because there's a lot of money to be made, right? There's a lot of money circulating through cannabis. And inherently, when there's a lot of money, that's going to draw a certain kind of human being that is very drawn to that as its sole focus. But I also tend to feel like, and where I place my energy and where I like to work with people, and everything actually about my sphere of influence is about trying to just attract good people that are sincere, that have good intentions, that care about other people, and that are willing to be respectful and supportive in those relationships. And so I think that in cannabis, everybody expects people or wants people to be good people. But that's just not the way the world works. And in any situation, whether it's cannabis or any other industry, you're going to find good people and you're going to find bad people. And I've just basically been trying to call out the bad people in this industry, but in any industry, quite frankly, and only be selective with trying to work with good people. And sometimes that means, letting what would be good opportunities go because you just don't want to work with those people. Or, for example, I had a lot of opportunity to take investment money from people that I just could tell weren't aligned with me in their own value sense. They looked at me and looked at my business as a money play and nothing else. And that's not what I'm about. That's not what I'm drawn to. And that certainly isn't what I want to create. And so I take it less about the cannabis industry, even though the reason I say it's different than people expect is I know people like this, old versus new cannabis conversation debate. But I don't see it that way because I know a lot of great people who are brand new to the industry that come in. They're great people. And those people are celebrated because they're good people and they're respecting the values and the integrity of the plants and what this represents versus people that are coming in for the bad reasons. And so I don't think this is a cannabis-centric conversation. I think this is a human being conversation. And more than anything, I hope that people can wake up to the fact that being very egocentric and very money focused and nothing else focused can actually have a lot of damaging properties to themselves and the people around them. And I want people to kind of open their hearts more and be a little bit more kind and just to everybody. And that, that doesn't matter if it's cannabis or anywhere else.
That's a great point. And I always think it's good to recognize that while we think a lot of these things are cannabis industry specific, it's just the world specific. And, it's not, is it heightened? Is it more so in the cannabis industry? But I think to your point, there are enough good people out there. I think it actually comes back to the being flexible and being adaptive is also playing your cards and working with people who are good people instead of just taking, the first offer, or taking what you can get, or as you said, working with somebody even though it's a good opportunity when it's not aligned. I think there's a lot of value to be said in that. And I think it kind of comes back to the strengthening your mindset. I really love the sentiment that you share at the very beginning around just your own personal rituals and what keeps you centered. I think it's all valuable stuff. And I do want to make sure that we highlight, since you guys are doing so many exciting things at Green Flower Media, that if there's anything in the next couple of weeks that we need to put on our radar, share that with us, Max. What's going on? What's in the pipeline?
I think there's two things that are worth mentioning that are happening, right now, essentially in this time frame. One is that because it's kind of back to school time, on Green Flower right now, I do believe it's going to expire somewhere in the next period. All of our certificate programs are 50% off. And, this was actually something that's come very much from the ethos of Green Flower's desire to give back to the community, because so many people are still stuck at home and are, a lot of times losing their careers and looking for something new to do. And again, I believe very fundamentally that education is the vehicle to success. And so we decided, right now, especially as this whole situation continues, to just make our programs even more accessible. So they're 50% off, as well as, I think literally just last week, we created a bundle where you could take the entire suite of Green Flower programs for, something like a 65% discount. It's called the Pro Pack. So anybody who is looking to really become better educated in all the facets, because we have extraction programs and medical programs and patient care programs and cultivation programs and CBD programs, or even just a cannabis fundamentals program. All of those are great ways to really not just get into the industry, but really further advance your knowledge and your experience. So those are what's happening right now that I would point people's attention to.
There's so much value in what you're doing, and so much value in just sharing kind of personal philosophies and this idea about how to be resilient as a business owner, as somebody who's running a company in this space. These ideas around, you're not always going to be on this one very linear trajectory. You got to be semper gumby. I love that. I think that's absolutely hilarious. But a lot of times that path to get there is filled with a lot more obstacles and roundabouts and circles and one step forward, two steps back, and you just got to be ready for anything. And you got to have a strong mindset. So Max, thank you so much for coming on today with us, sharing a little bit about yourself, all the wonderful things you guys are doing, and we love watching all of it. And keep on rocking, man.
I really appreciate the chance to come on and share a little bit more. And really love what you guys do. In fact, the entire Hoban Group is practically our experts behind some of our compliance and regulations content. So we're practically family.
Well, Max, thank you for what you do. And I look forward to getting back out to your beautiful facilities in Ventura, California on the coast there sometime soon. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hoban Minute. Do you have any ideas for episode topics or guests? We would like to hear from you. Reach out to us at media@hoban.law and stay tuned for more on the Hoban Minute.